Yo, what is up guys, Fat Rat here, and I'm here today with my first ever episode of Conspiracy Theories Saga. So in this episode today, we're going to be looking through the JFK assassination. So now if there's any other conspiracy theories you'd like me to look through or go through and just analyze, then definitely put them down in the comments below. And yeah, that's really it, so let's just get into the video.
I hear these niggas talking shit, that's cool, do what you need to. I pull up back seat and car search.
So just to start this video off, I'm going to give you a wee bit of base knowledge about JFK himself. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on May 29th, 1917 in Brooklyn, Massachusetts. His father, Joseph Kennedy, was a member of the Massachusetts General Court, and his grandfather, John Fitzgerald, was a US congressman and elected mayor of Boston twice. This was likely why he got into politics himself. JFK also served in the military before he would end up being elected to be the president of the US. Then JFK ended up being assassinated on the 22nd of November 1963. And this is kind of where all the conspiracies are involved. Within 2 hours after that fatal shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald was under arrest for the assassination. So I think before we go into any other conspiracies formed by anyone else, we should look into the government's conspiracy theory and the theory that they tried to push across.
I hear these niggas talking shit, that's cool, do what you need to. I pull up back.
Lee Harvey Oswald was born 18th October 1939 in Louisiana, New Orleans. His father passed away 2 months before Lee was born, this leaving him without a father figure in his life. When he was 3 years old, Lee was sent to the orphanage. It was by this stage that Lee had figured out that he was thought to be a burden to his mother, according to his brother Robert Oswald Jr. Marguerite, Lee's mother, then took him back when he was aged 12, where they had a small apartment in the Bronx. She worked long shifts from 7 till 7, so throughout the day Lee had to do things himself. This is where he started being truant from school and started going to places such as the library, museum and the zoo. He ended up finding books on Marxism, and by age 15 considered himself a Marxist. Quoted from his journal saying, "I was looking for a key to my environment. Then I found socialist literature. I had to dig for my books in the back dusty shelves of libraries." But this claim is also denied by his closest friend in New Orleans at the time, Edward Vogel. On the 24th of October 1956, Oswald signed up for the Marine Corps. In the Marines, he trained in radar operations, which was a position that required security clearance. On September 11, 1959, he received hardship discharge claiming that his mother needed care, but this ended up not being the case. 9 days later, Oswald embarked on his journey to Russia, where he attempted to become a citizen of the Soviet country. He was refused by the KGB for a citizen request and was expected to leave on October the 21st, 1959, as his visa would run out. Oswald then attempted suicide by inflicting a wound to his left wrist. This then delayed him from leaving the country and was kept under watch in hospital. Once released, he went to the United States Embassy and asked to be stripped of his US citizenship. During the interview with Richard Edward Snyder from the US Embassy, he made his intentions clear of defecting from the US, as he said he would share everything he learned while in the US Marines to the Soviet government. But by January 1961, he had changed his mind on wanting to be a Soviet citizen, writing this in his diary. "I'm starting to reconsider my desire about staying. The work is drab, the money I get had nowhere to be spent." Later on, in March 1961, Oswald ended up meeting Marina Prusakova. They married 6 weeks later in April. After having their first child together, they went to the US Embassy in Moscow so they could immigrate back to the US. On June 2nd, 1962, they left Russia and headed back for US soil once again. They ended up living in Dallas, where Oswald was starting to be more volatile, starting fights at work and home. He then got a job as a photoprint trainee, where he used the skills he had learnt to make himself a fake ID. He used the name Alec James Hiddell on his fake ID. Oswald used this alias to order in second-hand weapons. He got a .38 caliber revolver, and later on ordered a 6.5mm Italian carbine rifle, which was sent through the mail. A few days later, after he surprised Marina in the backyard when he walked out in all black with his .38 tucked by his waist and holding the rifle in hand. Oswald then got him to take a picture of him. This ended up being kind of the government's best evidence against Oswald, because he stated he did not have the rifle, and this picture was proof that he did. He would then use the rifle for his first assassination attempt on General Edwin Walker and missed the shot. Walker's only injury was bullet fragments in his arm. Oswald took the shot on the 10th of April 1963, but was not tied to the crime until after the JFK assassination. Not long after the attempt on General Walker's life, he then moved to New Orleans. After losing a job he acquired in New Orleans, he then sent a letter to the FPCC, otherwise known as the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He wanted to hire a small office and start a branch of the FPCC in New Orleans. The committee advised him against it, but Oswald went through with it anyway. He made leaflets which he would hand out that read, "Hands off Cuba." At one stage he was handing out leaflets outside of the international trade market. This was documented by WDSU. The next day he was interviewed on the radio. This is where it was uncovered to everyone about his defection to Russia, which brought his campaign for the FPCC to a grinding halt. Oswald hatched a new plan, which was to go to the place he was fighting for on the streets, Cuba. He went to Mexico City, but was refused to go to Cuba by the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy. Once he had already left Mexico on October 18th, 1963, his visa was approved, but it was too late. Oswald was then made aware that there was a job vacancy at the Texas School Book Depository, which he was hired for on October 16th, 1963. This would be the building that ended up being his sniper's nest. Many local newspapers before the arrival of Kennedy were publishing the route that he was going to take, which is when Lee asked his co-worker to take him on a midweek trip to Irving instead of his usual Mondays and Fridays. He left his wedding ring and $170 behind in Irving, I assume for his wife, but bought up a large paper bag that he said was filled with curtain rods, which the Warren Committee alleged was actually Oswald's rifle. On November 22nd, 1963, as Kennedy passed through Dealey Plaza, Lee fired 3 shots. One shot missed, the other hit Kennedy and John Connolly. The last bullet struck John F. Kennedy in the head, killing him. Oswald was able to flee the building before it was sealed off by police. He then made his way back to his rooming house, where he must have grabbed a couple things, then waited at a bus stop right outside his house. A Dallas patrolman, J.D. Tippett, pulled alongside him and the two were exchanging words. But when Tippett exited the vehicle, Oswald fired 4 shots from his revolver and fled the scene. Oswald ended up making his way to the Texas Theater, where he was later arrested by police. When he was under interrogation, he denied everything, claiming that he had been framed for the assassination and killing Tippett. Also denying ever owning a rifle, and that the pictures of him holding the rifle were fakes and his head was pasted on. Oswald was also asked if he knew who A.J. Adele was, which in reply he denied knowing who he was. He was then shown a forged Selective Service System card that read that name and had his picture on it, which he had on his possession at the time. Oswald said he would not answer any more questions about the card because he knew just as much as they did about it. On November 24th, 1963, Oswald was being escorted to an armoured vehicle set to take him to a county jail. On their way over, out pops Jack Ruby, who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald. Now it seems that the government seen Oswald as the assassin because of his history. At the time, being a communist was seen as wrong, and he was someone who was pushing that agenda. Although in his interviews with the police before he was murdered, he claimed not being a communist but just a Marxist. But this case does leave a lot of holes, and that's why there is conspiracy theories surrounding it. With Lee also claiming that he was a patsy and that he wasn't behind it also raises question. If he was the person to assassinate the president, why wouldn't he just admit it? Most people would, or at least after a few days of interrogation they would give in. But with his defection of the US and living in a Soviet country ended up being a big part of making this all so believable. But one thing I don't understand is, why was Oswald assassinated? And was there a reason behind it? In this next theory, we'll look at that.
I hear these niggas talking shit, that's cool, do what you need to. I pull up back.
The Kennedys' connection to the mob was not formed by John Kennedy, it was actually due to his father Joseph Kennedy. It's said by Tina Sinatra that JFK's father was the mastermind behind his campaign. This is when Joseph then enlisted the help of Frank Sinatra to be the middleman between him and the Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana. He had the plan of using the mob to sway people's votes in JFK's favour. Their first plan was to help him win the West Virginia primaries, which was a highly Protestant place at the time. Kennedy's main competition was Herbert Humphrey, who was also a Protestant, and before JFK had won the primary votes there, they had never voted in a Catholic, which Kennedy was. JFK ended up winning the primaries by a landslide, which is still to this day clouded in corruption allegations. It seemed there was a lot of money being moved around to make things happen. Brad Dexter, an actor and friend of Frank Sinatra, talked about his secretary Gloria Lavelle in an interview, saying she used to take money back and forth for him to Chicago to Sam Giancana for Jack Kennedy to distribute for payoffs. Another big part of the mob story with JFK was a lady named Judith Campbell. She was introduced to Kennedy by Frank Sinatra. They must have hit it off because she ended up being his mistress, even up to as far as 2 years after he was elected. Little to his knowledge, Sam Giancana was also sleeping with Campbell because he thought that she could be his direct link to the White House. Gangster Murray Humphreys was working on gaining support for Kennedy's campaign out of the hotel suite in Chicago. He worked the phones and met with politicians and union officials from around the world. The election night came, and when it looked like Illinois could go either way, Kennedy would then call Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, who assured him, "We're going to make it with the help of a few friends." Giancana sent people out to bend the voting process as required, and according to Humphrey's widow, votes weren't bought but were commanded and demanded. Kennedy ended up winning the popular vote, but only by a very small margin, but would have lost the electoral votes if 4,500 people in Illinois voted the other way. This sparked a lot of controversy that there was fraud going on, focused especially towards Illinois. Notre Dame professor Robert Blakey believed that the votes were stolen from Richard Nixon, saying that FBI wiretaps alone showed the mob's muscle and money made a difference in the election. The mafia doesn't do something for nothing. If they help you, they will always expect something in return. According to Humphrey's widow, John Kennedy said that his administration would lay off the mob. William Romer, who ran FBI surveillance on the mob in Chicago, said he listened to Giancana indicate that Sinatra had made a commitment to him in 1960. The agreement was that if Giancana used his influence with the West Side Bloc and other public officials, he believed he could get Kennedy to back off on the FBI investigations into Giancana. It also seems that Lucky Luciano, who was exiled from the US, was being promised return by Frank Costello and Meyer Lansky if Kennedy was elected. This was not smart deal making, for as soon as Kennedy made office, he did not follow through with any of that. Robert Kennedy Jr., who was Attorney General at the time, began to crack down on the mob, which was the opposite of what was offered, raising the amount of organised crime convictions from 35 in 1960 to 288 by 1963. By 1962, according to businessman Jose Alman, Florida mafia boss Santo Trafficante was saying the Kennedys were not honest. They took graft and didn't keep a bargain. Mark my words, this man Kennedy is in trouble, and he'll get what's coming to him. And also when he said he thought Kennedy was going to be voted in a second term, Trafficante said Kennedy is not going to make it to the election. He is going to get hit. Now the hit on Lee Harvey Oswald. Now the hit on Lee Harvey Oswald seems like it could be tied with this, because his killer, Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner, was said to have ties to organised crime, and was running his own prostitution racket. So if Jack Ruby is tied to organised crime, could this mean he was trying to make sure Oswald didn't talk? Because if he was hired by the mob to assassinate JFK, there's always a possibility he flips on someone, he will get reduced jail time. So since he was caught, they had to cut off loose ends to make sure they could never find out who was behind it. Also, the fact the Kennedys offered the mob so much but never held up their end gives them motive, because the mafia would not take kindly to having put their support behind him for nothing. The nail in the coffin would have been once they didn't just go back on their word, they went 200 kilometers back from it and started to crack down on the mob, rather than JFK said he would, which was lay off the mob. But the mob was not the only fishy group around this case.
I hear these niggas talking shit, that's cool, do what you need to. I pull up.
By many, it is believed that the assassination of JFK was a hit by the CIA. People suspect that the motives behind this was Kennedy's refusal to provide air support during the Bay of Pigs invasion. On the day of the JFK assassination, there were 3 men photographed being escorted by police near the Texas School Book Depository. They later became known as the 3 Tramps. These men were detained and questioned by the Dallas police. All of the men that are in the photographs are said to be well-known CIA agents. The photos were later shown by Jim Garrison on his Tonight Show appearance, and he suggested that they were involved in the JFK assassination. Assassination researchers Alan Weberman and Michael Canfield compared the photos to ones they had of possible suspects, later saying they were E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, which were both involved in the Bay of Pigs operation. It said that E. Howard Hunt is the oldest of the 3 Tramps, and that Sturgis is the tallest of them. Sturgis had become involved with Marita Lorenz. She would later claim that he participated in the JFK assassination. In 2003, while not in good health, Hunt allegedly confessed of knowledge of a conspiracy to kill Kennedy to his son. His health improved and he wrote an autobiography which he implicated Lyndon Johnson in the assassination, suggesting he and the CIA had worked together to do so. After his death, his sons, St. John Hunt and David Hunt, had claimed that their father had said several times that he was involved in a conspiracy to kill JFK. St. John Hunt also went on to expose other people involved in this conspiracy. They were as follows: Lyndon Johnson, Cord Meyer, David Phillips, Frank Sturgis, David Morales, Antonio Viciana, William Harvey, and an assassin he termed French gunman Grassy Knoll, who some presume was Lucien Sarti. The 2 sons claimed that their dad took them out of his memoirs to avoid possible perjury charges, but according to Hunt's widow and other siblings, the 2 sons had used him in a bad state and coaching him for their own financial gain. On December 4th, 1963, James Buchanan claimed that Frank Sturgis had met Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the assassination, and also according to a memo sent by the acting FBI director Louis Gray to Harry Haldeman, which stated, "Sources in Miami say that Sturgis is now associated with organised crime activities." Bernard Fensterwald's book, Assassination of JFK, claims that Sturgis was heavily involved with Santo Trafficante and Meyer Lansky, 2 people who I've talked about in the organised crime part of this video. Some researchers believe that David Morales, a CIA operative, was involved in the assassination. Morales' friends claim that he had opened up to him about what had happened at the Bay of Pigs and stated that Kennedy is responsible for him having to watch all the men he recruited and trained get wiped out. He also claimed that he said, "I was in Dallas when we got the son of a bitch, and I was in Los Angeles when we got the little bastard," which he was presumably referring to the John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy assassinations. Throughout all of these theories, it all links back to the Bay of Pigs operation, using this as their main reason for them having to have done this. But I do think that gives anyone who fought that day a reason to not like the Kennedys. Before the plan to kill Castro could go underway, the president had to accept the plan. On this plan it stated that they would need naval support and air support, which all of this was not given to them by the Kennedys. Also, looking at the photos of the three tramps and comparing them to Hunt and Sturgis, they do look very similar.
I let these hoes do exactly what they supposed to. They backstage.
So basically, in this part of the video, I'm just going to be putting my conclusion in now, after looking at all of the conspiracy theories and everything kind of in behind them, and just basically, yeah, as you can probably tell by how impromptu this sounds to the rest of the video, you can tell that the video was scripted up until now, and now I'm just kind of going wacky-backy off the top of my head. So basically, I don't think that if Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, I do not think that he was the only one behind it. I do think there was a conspiracy to kill JFK. I can't really say if I do believe it was organized crime or if I believe it was government agencies, because both of them really just kind of, once I read through like a lot of articles and researched about it, like just a lot of the things from each of the stories just started to like feel like they were clicking into place, like they were meant to be there. There's also the fact that researchers that have researched the sound around the JFK assassination say that the sound suggests that there was two gunmen, which, you know, that makes sense to me as well, because I just feel like Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't have been the main component behind it. I do feel like he definitely could have been a party to it, but I do not think that he was the only one behind it, if you get what I mean. And you know, all the theories in some kind of way give a motive, because, you know, you look at Lee Harvey Oswald, they say, oh, since he defected from the US and he was very anti the government going against Castro, which the government was doing, so, you know, he killed him because he wanted to stop them trying to get involved with Castro. Organized crime definitely depends on whether, you know, the mafia did help JFK win the election, because if they did help JFK win the election, they definitely wouldn't have liked it once, you know, the mob arrests went from 35 to like 280 something. Like, that would have made me extremely mad being a part of the mob if I was him, because it's like, you know, you told me you're going to lay off the mob if I help you get into office, and you've done the complete opposite. That would probably send me. I probably would get so mad that, you know, shooters would be ready to gun you down. Ready to gun you down. And, you know, government agencies, all just comes back to like the Bay of Pigs invasion and Kennedy just not giving air or naval support. So they all do have a motive, but yeah, it just depends on what you kind of think, I guess. So like, yeah, definitely put in the comments down below what you think.
What's this bitch? I got a feeling she don't need you. I ain't got.
Thank you guys for watching this video. If you made it this far, yeah, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any other conspiracy theories you'd like me to look through, definitely make sure to put them down in the comments below. And yeah, that's the fat rat out. Peace.
I hear these niggas talking shit, that's cool, do what you need to. I pull up back seat and car service, you know I don't need to.